Ready to kick off. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our 7th live talk session in the series on LGBTQ plus inclusion with Come Play With Me. For those of you who haven't joined a live talks before, and apologies to those who have heard this intro many times, my name is Gabby. I'm the head of partnerships at Live, which is the voice of the UK's live music and entertainment business, representing thousands of businesses, artists and backstage workers. Our live talks programme is a series of free online workshops and talks which focus on equality, diversity, inclusion, sustainability and well-being, and are aimed at making the UK live music industry a more inclusive and positive place to work. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a white female with brown eyes, blonde tied back hair, and I'm wearing a cream shirt with gold jewellery and gold-rimmed glasses. But before I hand over to today's wonderful host, Tony, I just need to go through a quick bit of housekeeping. Please note we are recording today's session to share online for those unable to join. If you would rather remain anonymous, please feel free to keep your camera turned off and change your Zoom name to anonymous. Please make sure your mic is muted throughout to avoid interference. If we have some time left at the end, we will open up the floor to questions, but please also feel free to put any questions you have into the Zoom chat and we will do our best to answer them at the end. A recording of today's session will be made available via the live website, which I will link in the chat in just a second. And that is it from me. So a huge thank you to Tony and Come Play With Me for putting today's session together. Over to you, Tony.
Hello. I'm going to share my screen in a second, but I just wanted to have my face here so that people could see that, I exist, I'm a person. So my name's Tony, my pronouns are they, them. I'm also going to self-describe myself. I'm a white person with short, blonde, brown hair that I just had cut yesterday, so it's feeling very fresh, and a green jumper. If anybody needs any sort of access stuff throughout the session, then just let one of us know, and we can help you with that. I'm going to quickly share my screen. We've got about an hour together, so I'm going to go through a little bit of a presentation. I'm going to ask you some questions, tell you some things about LGBT inclusion, and then there's a little bit of time at the end for some action planning, and we've got some questions as well. I'm also joined by Tony, who is the director at Come Play With Me, who you can see probably waving in one of the corners. So if you've got any questions for either of us at the end of this session, then please feel free to ask. You can always follow up with us afterwards as well. I'm just going to pop my screen share on. You should all be able to see that. As I said before, my name's Antonia. My pronouns are them. I am the programs manager at Come Play With Me. So lots of aspects of my job are kind of looking after the various programs that we run across the organisation. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about us as an organisation, because it's the easiest way to do that. We're basically a non-profit music development organisation. So we specialise in supporting people from different marginalised communities furthering their careers in music. We started off as a record label supporting marginalised voices, recording, releasing music. That quickly turned into supporting promoters, sound engineers, people that want to work in the live industry, people that want to work across kind of labels and music business as well. So we now do a lot of different types of support. We have a podcast, a magazine, we have a full events team, we run a conference every year, do lots and lots of different things. You can find out more about what we do on our website or just by chatting to us after this. Our mission is to fight for an equitable, inclusive and diverse music industry. So we provide that tailored career development to individuals through all those different things: events, label, podcast, magazine, workshops like this one. We do mentoring and shadowing opportunities for people as well. So lots and lots of things going on, lots of touch points for people to get involved in our work. One of the biggest things that we do at the moment is LGBT inclusion workshops and consultancy. We're a queer-led organisation, so the work that we've done has always been inherently kind of supportive and kind of run by queer people and for queer people. So we've got this kind of 8 years background in looking after and sort of pushing for LGBT inclusion across the industry. This session is really a bit of a taster session of everything that we do. So we do lots of different workshops for promoters, for people that work in live, but also across music business. So we work a lot with education settings, senior leadership teams in different organisations and things like that. So if there's anything that you're interested in after this and you want to chat about how we can work with you or your organisation more, then we do a lot of tailored workshops and tailored support for people doing different projects and working across different parts of the industry. This session is, like I said, going to be about 40 minutes with some time for questions at the end. We're going to go through 3 different things. So we're starting with language and identity. We'll do a little bit of terminology, not loads, because we don't have loads and loads of time. But what we'll do is go through some of the words that come up quite often in sessions like this and things that we get asked about quite a lot. It also gives us a little bit more of a shared kind of language to use as we go through the session. You'll hear some of the words pop up again over and over as we talk about different people's identities and things like that. I'll tell you a little bit about LGBTQ experiences, which kind of comes with a little trigger warning that I'll touch on as we get to it. But we're just talking about hate crime and things like that, not too deep into that LGBT experiences. We will also talk about what it's like for people within the music industry, how many LGBT people are currently working in the industry and things like that. Then we'll just talk about what you can do. So usually we'll do like a full sort of session of action planning and putting people into breakout rooms and all that kind of thing. We've got one exercise that you can do together in this room, all 44 of you all at once, which might be chaos. We'll see what happens. But I'd really encourage you to, throughout the session, use the chat function, talk to each other, talk to me, ask questions, things like that, so that we can kind of look through all those different things. We'll have time for some questions at the end, but so if there's anything that's like huge that you're thinking about asking, save that to the end. But as we go along, feel free to ask questions in the chat and we can get to them as we go along. So to kick us off, language and identity. This is the part where you might know some of the things already that we talk about. Some of these things might be new to you. Some of the definitions might be different to ones that you've heard before. I'd absolutely encourage you to chat about it, talk in the meeting chat and bring things up and ask questions as we go along. But I'm going to start by putting some words up on the screen. And if you could either unmute and talk to me or just pop in the chat some of your definitions for some of these words, that would be great.
Transitioning means to change.
Yep. Yeah. Anything on any of the others from anyone? Someone can kick us off with the acronym, I'm sure.
The LGBTQ plus is certainly, as I understand it, lesbian, gay, bisexual, or the trans prism. Q could be questioning, queer, and plus is, I suppose, the umbrella catch-all for everything and everything that allows for anyone to express themselves as to who they are.
Yes.
And what I will also say is trans is not a sexual identity. It's actually who you are as a person. So lesbian, bi, and gay are sexual identities. Trans is not a sexual identity. So we are different from LGB.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a huge.
That's the same with non-binary as well.
Yeah, someone's just popped in the chat actually about non-binary being a gender expression outside the binaries of male and female. And yeah, I'm going to pop that one up as well. Lesbian, gay, bi, trans, queer, plus is the acronym. Sometimes you might see it with an IA on the end as well. Sometimes you'll see even longer ones. Sometimes you'll see it as just LGBT. Sometimes actually when you see it as just LGBT, that's often in organisations or people that work with government, because LGBT is what's kind of written across policy. So they try to, if you're working with like lobbying government and things like that, it's best practice usually to mirror how they sort of say things. But most of the time, particularly within communities and within sort of LGBT communities, you'll see LGBTQ plus, and people will talk about the LGBTQ community. yeah, and the plus kind of representing everybody that comes under that umbrella. Non-binary, again, an umbrella term for people whose gender doesn't sit comfortably with man or woman outside those binaries of male and female. So non-binary identities are really varied. So they can include people that have some aspects of binary identities. Other people might reject them completely. But then, you know, it might be that some people dress more masculine or more feminine, but still identify as non-binary and use they, them pronouns, or she, they, or he, they pronouns. It's a good sort of huge umbrella term for people that sort of are outside of that binary. Transitioning, anyone want to add anything to the definition that we've got already? I think the definition we had already was moving. Transitioning usually as the steps that a trans person might take to live in the gender in which they identify. So each person's transition might involve very different things. For some people, it can be medical intervention like hormone therapy or surgeries. Not all trans people want that. Not all trans people are able to have that. As some of you may know if you've been to sessions like this one before, or know more about kind of trans identities, those medical interventions can often be very long processes, very expensive processes that often are kind of inaccessible for a lot of people. So, someone's just popped in the chat, would gender fluid also be included here? I would include gender fluid as like a non-binary identity, as that kind of fluidity of not kind of being within those binaries or not wanting to be within those binaries. Gender fluid being very specifically about gender and not just about everything else, basically. And queer being one of the words that comes up quite often when I talk to people, but a term used by people that want to reject specific labels of things like romantic orientation, sexual orientation, or gender identity. So thinking about myself, for example, I would describe myself as non-binary queer person, basically because I feel like the word queer kind of covers everything for me. It covers my romantic and sexual orientation, covers my gender identity, it covers everything like about how I dress and like what I kind of, the way that I express my gender is also covered by that word. It is often been used as a slur in the past and sometimes currently by people. So there are friends that I have that I wouldn't even really describe myself as queer in front of, because I know that it would be upsetting for them to hear that word in a different context to how they used to hear it and things like that. So yeah, just thinking about that is really important as well. There are 4 more words on the next slide. If anybody wants to have a go at defining any of these words, that would be great. We've got pansexual, intersex, cisgender, and genderqueer, which Jen, you just put gender fluid in the chat, which is a very similar thing. Jenny, pansexual is attracted to people irrespective of gender. Yes.
And cisgender is identifying as the gender that you're assigned at birth.
Yep. Anyone want to have go at intersex or genderqueer? I'm going to pop the intersex one up. So intersex is a term used to describe someone who might have the biological attributes of both sexes, or whose biological attributes don't fit with society's assumptions of what constitutes male or female. So when you're born, doctors will decide whether you're male or female based on the sex characteristics that they can see. If they are in any kind of, if there's any ambiguity with that, they will decide either way for you, which is weird to think about. Often and sometimes you'll sort of see people finding out that they're intersex at a later age, and there's a really good organisation called Intersex UK that do loads of really great work around healthcare for intersex people. Sometimes people will find out that they're intersex based on sex characteristics that you can't see, such as like your womb, your testes, things like that, where someone will go in for like a routine operation on something, sort of, you know, when they're a lot older and find out that they're intersex through that other routine operation. It's nothing to do with the intersex identity. So if you're interested in finding out more about intersex identities, then Intersex UK is a really good place to signpost to. Cisgender, someone said already, but if your gender identity is the same as the sex that you're assigned at birth, it means you're cisgender. There's some great chat going on in the chat box about people being offended by the term cisgender, and Saskia sort of putting in there that cisgender is great, there's nothing wrong. You know, there's that kind of I think it's good to have a word to describe everybody's experience. It becomes less othering for transgender people if there's a word that cisgender people can also use for their experience too. It makes it less less othering for people that might be more marginalized. And genderqueer is someone that doesn't subscribe to conventional gender distinctions, but then identifies with neither, both, or a combination of male and female genders. So very specifically about gender, very specifically about kind of how people might be kind of, yeah, Jules has just put in there genderqueer, not following any binary conformity or rules. Yeah, that's kind of where we're at with that genderqueer thing. It kind of comes under the non-binary umbrella of things, but it's very specific about gender. That's it for terminology, but there are tons and tons and tons of other words that people use to describe themselves, tons of other words that we've not used in this section. So if you're interested in like finding out more about terminology and things like that, there's a really good website called Transactual, who's very specifically have lots of terminology about trans identities, and then also Stonewall's website has a massive glossary of things as well. So both of those are really good resources, which I'll signpost to at the end. I want to dig down a little bit into gender identity, gender expression, and sexual and romantic orientation. So I've put some definitions up already on these. So your gender identity being your sense of your own gender. So it might be male, it might be female, it might be genderqueer, non-binary, something else. It might correspond to the sex assigned at birth, which means cisgender. It might not, which means non-binary, trans. It's very much your sense of your own gender and who you are. Your gender expression is then how you outwardly express your gender. So it might be through the clothes that you wear, the haircut that you have, even sometimes things like the job that you have or the interests and hobbies that you have and things like that. When you start thinking about how people express their gender and in what ways people express their gender and how you do as a person, it can get quite complicated and quite big, and you can start thinking about things like, you know, the gigs that you go to, the music that you like, the clothes that you wear, all these different things that are very gendered throughout society. So your gender expression is usually in the context of society's expectations of what a man looks like or what a woman looks like or what is expected of those two binary genders. Your sexual and romantic orientation are your attractions to other people. So your sexual attraction or your romantic attraction to other people. Those things are separate. Can anybody tell me why it's good to separate them sometimes? So if you're sexually attracted to different people and romantically attracted to other people, yeah, someone can be bisexual but not biromantic. Yes, exactly, Jenny. So like if you're bisexual, you might sleep with people of different sexes and different genders, but you might not be romantically attracted to them. So you might be sexually attracted to all genders, but only romantically attracted to women, for example, which means you're probably more likely to find longer term relationships with different people to your sexual relationships. So there's a good difference there between kind of how we're attracted to people and what that looks like for us. And that can be kind of two very separate things sometimes, or very different things for different people. I've put some other words up on here because some of them were missing from the terminology section, but things like cisgender, genderqueer, non-binary are under your gender identity. Feminine, masculine being your just kind of gender expressions, androgynous as well, which is missing off there. But then your sexual romantic orientation being like straight, gay, lesbian, bi, pan, queer, lots of different words can kind of fit across all these things. So queer could be in any of these. They're definitely not kind of all the words that you would use to describe some of these things, but thinking about yourself and the way that you kind of go around the world and the way that you navigate things, whether that's kind of going to work, finding healthcare, finding housing, socially, all those different things, like how you identify really plays a part in how you experience different things, and particularly different spaces. So I want you to think about that when you are going through the rest of this session. There are loads and loads of things about us that make up who we are. It's not just our gender identity, our gender expression, or our sexual and romantic orientation. There are other things that kind of help us navigate the world, or don't help us navigate the world, depending on, you know, how much privilege you have in these places. So thinking about things like class background, your race, your nationality, your age, you know, your socio-economic status at the moment, your neurodiversity, your disability, faith, religion, all those different things that make up who you are, not just necessarily things that are on the Equality Act, or, you know, are things that you would think about all the time, but in lots of different spaces, you're going to feel different based on your identity and the assumptions that people are making about you. This is the part where I'm going to ask you to answer some more questions, but I'm going to give you an example. And usually what I do with this bit is give you 3 or 4 different examples of people and break you out into different breakout rooms and answer this question. But I'm going to do it as a full group. And I'm only going to give you 2 examples of people. So these 2 people are both going to a summer festival in the Lake District. They've got one thing in common, in that they're both 26. They have very different identities. How would the different aspects of their identities affect their experience of attending this summer festival? And I want you to think about everything from deciding to go to the festival, seeing a poster for it, all the way through to waiting for that festival to happen, buying a ticket, getting there, being at the festival, all the way through to like going home. So what their experience is across maybe, I don't know, from seeing the poster to going home after it, what different aspects of their identity might affect different bits of that experience. And this is where I'm going to leave you in like a couple of minutes of silence. But feel free to unmute or just stick things in the chat and we can chat about what those different things might be for people. If you're in a group on watching on a screen, feel free to discuss in your groups and talk about this as well. Anyone want to unmute and tell me something?
I'm thinking about the neurodiverse aspect. I was just writing in the chat, but it's probably easier to talk. Each neurodiversity has a specific impact on lots of different things. Like, I've got Tourette's, so I find it difficult going to lots of places where I might shout at someone. But I mean, like, they all come with their different not problems. Problem isn't a word. What word am I looking for? Challenges. It's hard to but yeah, sorry, that's all I was thinking.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because like whenever you think about, particularly if you think about your own identity and then what that means in terms of other people's identity, like something like neurodiversity is a huge umbrella term of people. It's a huge community of different people that have different challenges. The same thing isn't going to work for everybody. And I think someone's just actually popped something, Jules just popped something about ticket purchasing for like people that might need a carer's ticket or have like need disabled access. Like you might need some more accommodations to make that event accessible. So both these people, one of them being disabled, one of them being neurodiverse, going to need probably very different things in terms of being able to access the same thing, right? And we've got some more things in the chat about money being a big barrier. Yeah, this person on the right hand side is from a working class background and is also trans. Trans people are less likely to have full-time work and less likely to have financial support. So, you know, that's going to be a huge factor in whether or not that person can afford to buy a ticket or not, compared to the other person who's from a middle class background and might have a full-time job or might have a part-time job or whatever. Claire's just popped in the chat as well. Do they see people like them on the lineup? Good question. Yeah, what does the lineup look like in terms of identity? Are there disabled or neurodiverse people on the lineup? Are there trans people on the lineup? Are there people of color on the lineup? Are there any women on your lineup? You know, there's lots of questions around particularly festival lineups at the minute, and there's a lot of scrutiny for many festivals of all sizes about kind of diversity on lineups and things like that. Rural versus urban, various different things. If you're from rural Scotland compared to Manchester, like what are the transport links going to be to get to that festival? You know, lots of different things. As a queer person and cis woman, there's going to be concerns around personal safety. Yep, definitely. I think sometimes when I do this session and there's two people, one of them is more marginalized than the other, and you think, oh, this is a, you know, cisgender white middle class person, people sometimes don't think about the personal safety aspect for both of those people. So, you know, are either of these people going to feel completely safe most of the time at a music festival? It's unclear. You know, sadly there are going to be concerns for both of them, but for very different reasons and very different ways, right? Holly, you've just put out a great one in the chat as well about, you know, worrying about the price of tickets. What's the target audience of the festival? You know, when you think about, you know, how people experience an event, I always think about from the very creation of the event, from the very first time someone sees a poster or decides that they want to go, what is going to make them decide that they want to go, and how are they going to know it's for them based on different aspects of their identity? Yeah, thinking about accessibility, whether people are going to be comfortable using toilets. Why are so many festival toilets gendered when they're just portaloos most of the time? Just not unnecessary. I thought that at Primavera last year when I was queuing for a really long time for a portaloo, and I was like, but those are just portaloos as well. There's like literally no point to this gendering. It's funny. Yeah, so loads of different things, right? Lots of different aspects of people's identity are going to affect how they experience things. and how they experience that kind of, particularly in this case, of summer music festival in the Lake District. When we do these sessions that are kind of longer, a couple of hours long, what we do is really dig down into all the different bits of that. So we break it down into marketing and communication, lineup and logistics of the event, and all that kind of, like, there's 4 different aspects that we look through. We use that as using these people as a case study to work out what we could do differently within our events and stuff like that. So yeah, that's where we kind of go with this section. But what I'm going to do this time is veer you off course and onto some LGBT experiences. We've got about 20 minutes left, so we're going to go through some LGBT experiences at the moment, which is kind of going to back up some of this identity stuff that we've been talking about. And then we're going to do a little bit of work around things that you can do, right now, things that you can do as an individual, things that you might want to change and add to some of your processes. So LGBT experiences at the moment, the latest UK music diversity report, which was the end of last year, said that only 21% of the UK music industry is made up of people that identify as something other than straight. 53% of the industry is made up of women, and 1.7% of the industry is made up of non-binary people. There weren't any clear stats on how many of those people identified as trans. I think likely because there isn't enough to report on. The people that identified as non-binary, the majority of those people are at apprentice or intern level. So the number of non-binary and trans people working in the industry decreases as career level rises. There's obviously been a lot of great work around that 53% being 53% now. It's brilliant, but there's still a lot of work to do in terms of getting people up the career ladder that might be like of a marginalized gender. There's lots and lots of stats within that diversity report from UK Music. If you've not seen it, then I would encourage you to go have a look at it. I could have done about 5 slides just on that report, but I don't work for UK Music, so I'm not going to do that. But yeah, there's a couple of stats here as well, just about specifically about trans identities. 14% of trans people aren't open about their gender identity to people in their family. And that number actually increases to 24% for non-binary people. Nearly 20% of LGBT people who visited a cafe, restaurant, bar or nightclub in the last 12 months have been discriminated against based on their sexual orientation or gender identity. So when you think about that, particularly that last stat, if you're working in live music, if you're working in bars, nightclubs, venues, you're promoting shows, you're working at festivals, you have to, I think you have a responsibility to LGBT people, to people of colour, to marginalised people, to help them when they are being discriminated against in the spaces that you run. Whether that is making sure that there are clear comms around, you know, how to report things, how to tell people that those things have happened. I'm going to flick onto the next slide because when we talk about hate crime, I think it's really important to talk about the increase in hate crime since the pandemic. So at the end of last year, there was a hate crime report by the UK government, and it turned out that actually hate crimes recorded by police were up more than a quarter generally. But then when you dug into trans hate crime, it had increased by 56%. Sexual orientation hate crimes had increased 42%, and any racist hate crimes made up 2/3 of all hate crimes reported. So when you think about that hate crime reporting, coupled with the fact that actually 4 in 5 hate crimes go unreported because a lot of LGBT people are kind of particularly reluctant to go to the police, actually those numbers are probably a lot more based on these things. And you might think that, you know, these things don't happen anymore, or this kind of thing isn't something that happens. But even just at the end of last year and beginning of this year, there's one headline there, but there's been multiple sort of attacks on LGBTQ spaces, particularly across America, but also here in the UK, here in London, in Manchester, in lots of places. And historically, LGBT spaces have been sort of targeted by police and shut down and moved along and things like that. So there's lots of things to think about, I think, when you're trying to ensure that LGBT people feel safer in the spaces that you run and the spaces that you occupy. So just thinking about all that, along with how people's identity might kind of feed into how they experience different spaces, is really important when you're thinking about your spaces and what you are doing and what you can do to, you know, alleviate some of that stress and alleviate some of that worry for LGBT people. A few things about what you can do. Oh, Mia's just put a good question in the chat, actually. Why might they have increased since the pandemic? I'm not sure if a very personal opinion, but I think a lot of people have lost decorum since the pandemic and forgotten how to behave with each other. But there is also a huge increase in legislation being removed for trans people, in particular in government. There's a lot of moving around of laws and changing laws that people don't kind of necessarily adhere to. There's been a rise in right-wing leaders across the world. You know, there's a lot of people using, you know, social media in a way that doesn't necessarily reflect or, you know, it doesn't necessarily reflect society's actual views on different things. I saw a report the other day that actually 4% of people don't understand or like or consider trans people as something that should exist. But the internet sometimes might tell you that that feels like a lot more. 4% is loads, but there is a very vocal small group of people, I think, particularly for trans people, that are very loud. But yeah, no, there's a lot of different factors, I think, in terms of government changes and things like that, that isn't helping. So there's lots of things that you can do. There's lots of things that you can do to alleviate some of that stuff, particularly for trans people, but for LGBT people in general. You know, supporting Pride and supporting Pride Month is a really good way of showing that. But there is also a lot of stuff that you can do throughout the year and throughout the sort of projects and spaces that you run. There's some stuff on this slide for venues, particularly. Things like facilities, making, I mean, someone just popped in the chat that the Beyonce tour has gender neutral facilities. Gender neutral are all gender options where possible, like all the time, not just when a band or artist request it. Some bands and artists will request it. There's a few bands that I know, Los Campesinos being one of them, that always request gender neutral spaces for their audiences. Thinking about things like lineups, we've talked about that already, but you know, challenge any external promoters that might be coming into your venue, and create an inclusion policy on lineups. It's okay to say that you want a certain percentage of POC or LGBT representation across your programming. It's absolutely, you know, vital for LGBT people to be able to see themselves on lineups and be able to see themselves as part of something, particularly music. You know, when you go to a gig, you're all sharing an experience, but you're all coming at it from a very different place and very different identities. So think about that representation across your programming. You don't have to have a queer person on every single lineup that you have at your venue, but having, you know, queer people across your programming is really, really important. You know, training and briefing all your staff on what to expect from different events and things like that. Like, you know, if you've got, we've had a few events before where we've done an event at a venue we've never used before, and it's been a very queer sort of club night event, and you know, this bar staff didn't necessarily, the security staff didn't necessarily know that people would be turning up dressed how they were dressed, and they weren't ready for that. And they were, you know, there's a rule usually at this venue that we used where you have to keep your t-shirts on, and we did a gay club night there, and I don't know if you've ever been to a gay club night, but no one's wearing a t-shirt, so it's a very different thing for that venue to run, and actually in hindsight, a briefing for them of what to expect from the audience or expect from performers is really, really important for that kind of understanding. Yeah, fundraising for local charities and groups, like find out who is working on the ground and doing grassroots work in the places that you're going, particularly if you're running festivals or deciding on, you know, where things are going to happen, where you're going to be touring, if you're looking after a band, if you're a tour manager, things like that. Think about who needs the help in the specific communities that you're going to. But yeah, lots and lots of different things for venues on this section. I'm not going to read them all out, because if you want to take a photo of it, you can just do that if you like. I'll send these slides around to Gabby as well, so she can send them across. There's some that are specifically for promoters, so if you're not necessarily working in the same venue all the time, sort of thinking about risk assessment and working with venues and how you're going to brief them on the ethos and mission of your organisation or the promotion teams that you have. Thinking about safeguarding and well-being is something that we talked about a little bit when we were talking about the festival. But having that clear point of contact for audience members, for customers, to talk about things, to report hate crime and all that kind of stuff is really, really important. But it also gives everybody else the space they need to be able to talk about their experience as well. So it's not necessarily just helping LGBT people. A few other things on this as well around kind of pronouns, pronoun badges, stickers, asking for people for their pronouns and things like that. Setting that expectation is really important. And being really clear, like reiterating that these are your values and this is what you believe as an organisation. When you're challenging other people is really important. And being active where you can. I'm going to pop some signposting up on this next slide. There's a few really good organisations that we've been working with throughout kind of the last 18 months or so. Switchboard are an LGBT helpline who are fantastic. They are the people to ring for any problem that you might have, any issue you might have, any challenge you might have. They're really great, and they have a really cool podcast that you should listen to, which yeah, it's really great. It's really fun. Transactual are the ones that I talked about earlier that have their huge glossary. They also have loads of resources for people to find out more information or how to, you know, support trans people that you might be close to or you might work with. We've been working with AIM, Youth Music, Black Lives in Music, Independent Venue Community and the Musicians Union recently. So signposting to all those on their LGBT inclusion work is really good. Homotopia, based in Liverpool, they're really great, do loads of really cool events and stuff. And the Trans Creative Collective, if you're looking for people that do live shows or production or mastering or like anything like that, the Trans Creative Collective either has someone or knows someone. So if you're wanting to use trans creatives, they have a huge amount of network that they can help you with. And Jen's just put Saffron in there. Actually, weirdly, took Saffron's logo off our signposting board like last week.
No, put it back on.
I don't know why. I think it was because the session that I'd done with Saffron had it on, and then I just used a different slide deck. But Saffron are also incredible. They're based in Bristol, right? But they work across the north.
Yeah. They're based in Bristol. I'm their lawyer, so.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, Saffron are really good, really great. They do loads of stuff around specific for like trans people, and yeah, they're really inclusive and great. I would definitely recommend. Yeah, anyone else want to pop anyone else in the chat that they want to signpost to or tell us about? That'd be fab. But I'm going to leave this open for questions. Tony is also here, as I mentioned. So if you've got any hard questions, you can ask him. If you've got any easy questions, you can ask me. But yeah, thank you for your time, everybody, and for joining us over lunchtime. Yeah, stick around for questions if anybody has any. Oh, Attitude is Everything, also a wonderful organization. Yeah, they're really good.
I do have another one. I'm just trying to find the details though. Oh,
Tony, do you know anyone or any organisations that specialise in socioeconomic status training, or does anyone in this group? Because I'm on the hunt for someone to do.
what was it? What was it that you're looking for? Sorry.
Someone who specialises in socioeconomic status training, if that's even a thing. I'm sure it must be, but so we can talk further about that, which obviously affects all sorts of people.
I'm trying to think. Feel like I know someone, but I can't remember their name or anything about them.
If you remember them at some point.
Useless. But I'm going to write it down because I'm sure I spoke to someone not that long ago, or maybe it was too long ago. Me and Tony had a chat with someone. I've also just put my email address in the chat. It's antonia@cpwm.co if anybody is interested in further training or like further sessions like this one or deeper sessions, then please get in touch and we can chat. Yeah, the class background stuff. I'm sure there is someone that I've spoken to recently. I'll try and dig out the details for you.
Amazing, thank you. And do you do any of kind of longer, more in-depth sessions in person with Come Play With Me?
Yeah, so we do quite a few different so we do venue specific sessions and promoter specific sessions that are 3 hours long and kind of bring in case studies, but also encourage people to bring their current sort of issues and challenges with them. We also do very specific tailored work. So if someone's got any sort of project that they want to ensure is more LGBT inclusive or wants to make sure that they're, you know, using the right language and that kind of thing, we do a lot of consultancy on stuff as well. So yeah, we're very flexible in terms of timings and yeah, things that we can do. Yeah.
Amazing. I'm sure there's plenty of people on this call, either promoters, venues, who will hopefully be reaching out after this.
Yeah, absolutely. That'd be great. Yeah, we're keen to work with anyone. We love collaborating with anyone. So yeah.
Oh, Tony's got his hand up.
Thanks, Gabby. I was going to ask, so I'm Tony that runs Come Play With Me and works with Antonia. And I'm sorry for the confusing Tony-Antonia dynamic. It causes all sorts of problems in the office. I was going to ask, we'd really value your feedback because I think Antonia's done a brilliant job of we tried to pitch this at a level that was both, for those of you that might be thinking about how to make your spaces or your venues or your organisations more LGBTQ inclusive, but also those of you who were LGBTQ yourselves and wanted some guidance or even a safe space to speak in. And I just would really love to know if you think we've pitched this at the right level, or it would have been good to have had more about this or more about that. Any feedback's really, really valued. And thanks for having us, Gabby.
No, thank you so much for coming along to do this. Personally, I thought it was a really brilliant session. I thought you really hit the mark on so many points, really informative. The kind of terminology part is so important. Personally, I'm always looking to educate myself further and really trying to fully understand every single piece of terminology, so it creates more inclusive and safe spaces. And yeah, no, thank you so much. I thought it was absolutely on point and perfect for obviously the live music sector, what we represent live. Everyone and most people in these rooms are from the live music sector, so I thought it was amazing. Thank you so much.
I've just popped a little feedback form in the chat if anybody has time to, apparently it takes 6 minutes to fill in, but you could do it faster, I reckon.
I also put a link for the Jaguar Foundation. So in the kind of blurb that you can pull down, if you are like a artist, there's like a specific clause that has been written in there that you can add into your rider, which states that you won't play the gig unless there's like a full inclusion of everyone on there, which is really good. And we always try and push all of our artists to include this, whether they're playing a festival, a big lineup, or anything like that. So
Yeah, that's really cool. Thank you. Wicked.
I also think quite a few venues are now trying to include that in their venue contracts as well, to make sure promoters are also pushing for better diversity across programming, etc.
Yeah. Adrian's just put in the chat as well about there being a networking peer support group. I feel like setting one of those up has been on my back burner for like 2 years, and I've just never got around to it because I've never had time. So if someone could do that, that'd be great. And then we could just join it.
Perhaps it's something Live can look to do. We can talk on that further, Tony.
Yeah, certainly something I'd love to discuss.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would welcome that too.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Hi everyone, my name's Reese. I just have a quick question in part of the terminology. I'm organizing a panel discussion at the agency I work for's Pride event this year. It's an LGBTQ plus alliance, and we're presenting a panel with our clients, a discussion about the representation within the entertainment industry. I wanted to ask you about your opinion on the word queer, because is the panel discussion was about representation within the entertainment industry and queer empowerment. But I wasn't aware that that word is also difficult for people to hear. For me, I thought that was more of an inclusive word to use as far as like a queer empowerment, but what would you suggest I use?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, I think, because a lot of you'll see a lot more in sort of like recent years, people using the word queer to describe themselves, or like, you know, there's a lot of stuff at the minute that is about queer communities, for queer communities, queer TV, you know, like there's a lot, that word is used quite a lot, a lot more often than I think it used to be. I think historically through sort of like the AIDS crisis through the 80s and 90s, it was really used against gay men in a really, really strong way, to sort of demonize the community. And there's a lot of, a very, very negative press around that, using that word. So it's very much used as a slur against people. So you'll see quite a lot of people will hate the word and not want to use it, and not want to use it for themselves, and not want to, you know, hear it. Then on the flip side, there are lots of people that sort of will have reclaimed that word and will use it for themselves to self-describe and whatever.
Would you advise I don't use that word? Because I use that word in my personal life as, like you said, I've taken that word and claim it back, and I use that as a empowering word for myself. But I understand, like you said, it's not for everybody. And I want this panel discussion and our Pride event to be inclusive. So it was just very, it's impactful for me to kind of get everyone else's opinion on that. But perhaps I'll just maybe not take that word out.
Yeah, I mean, someone was just about to say something else, I think. Were they? Don't know. Yeah, I mean, if it was me, I would use it because of the fact that I've reclaimed it for myself, and quite a lot of other people have. And I think being able to talk about that within that panel is useful, like talking about why that word is being used and how, like, what the historical use of that word was and things like that. But then, you know, it's about kind of, using words that people might use to describe themselves is fine and is okay. But I think, making sure that people know the historical background of that word is probably the important thing to do.
Fantastic. That's really great advice. Thank you.
Yeah. Antonia, I was the person that hummed there, and I was going to say the same thing, because I think it's really important that those conversations are had. What's probably key is setting the context right from the outset, because we know that language always moves, and it's fairly fluid in that way. And I, as with all of these things, we're all on a journey of education and self-awareness. So I think once you start sort of devaluating what words mean, it makes it really difficult to kind of take people on the journey and have that education. So I mean, obviously, Reese, it's down to you, but I think there's validity and a currency to talk about it, as long as you've sort of almost headline right at the beginning the context. It allows for conversations, really.
Thanks, both of you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, words change, and like lots of words come up to describe people, and those things are very fluid sometimes and can change quite quickly. Like I always talk about 3 years ago, I didn't identify as non-binary. I would have identified as cisgender, but that's because I didn't know that the word non-binary or non-binary identities really existed until then. So then when I started seeing other people using the word queer to describe themselves and non-binary to describe themselves and using they, them pronouns, I was like, oh wait, that's a bit of me. I could do that too. So, you know, when I was a teenager, I might have been a cisgender lesbian, but now I am not. I'm queer non-binary person. So like, and that might change again in the future when more words become available or the meaning of other words change or whatever. And I think it's okay to be it's okay to use words so long as you have that kind of understanding and can give that context to people as well, of that being able to change for people. Anyone else got any questions or comments, or want to show me their dog or anything?
I find it like I work in the legal sector and I'm non-binary, but I find it really, really difficult communicating that to people. So I kind of fall back on the pronoun she, they instead, to make it easier for people to, in that sector anyway. It's kind of like you lead a double life. I don't know how to like get over that hump though. I don't know, it's weird.
Yeah. If it's helpful to know, I do the same thing all the time. And actually, even for this session, I was like, she, there, and then I was like, no, I'm just going to go full on they, them. I think this is fine. But yeah, sometimes I'll use she, there. It very much depends on context. And sometimes I just use she, her, because it's even, you know, I don't have to have that conversation. But it is really difficult, and it doesn't, like, I don't know. I mean, this might be a personal question to you straight back, but like, does it make you feel better when other people have pronouns in their email signatures or Zoom names, or like share their pronouns with you before you meet them? Or
yeah, yeah, completely. I fit, like, even if I'm emailing people that I don't know their gender or their pronouns, I just keep it neutral before it's made aware to me, just out of respect, because you just don't know, do you?
Yeah.
And it's easy to just either use their names or just use they until, because you know 99% of the time it's fine, but it's just that one person that you might not know. And
yeah,
I just think it's a respectful way to be, really.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I think there was a question in the chat from Mia, Tony, about
1% of the music industry non-binary at intern level, because younger generations are becoming more aware. Yeah, I think that probably does play a part in it. Yeah, it's interesting, I think, when you look at that report, because you can see there are so many different reasons why some of those things exist, and a lot of the things that we look at you know, there are structural things, there's structural racism, there's structural misogyny, like there's all these different things within the world that we live in, you know, that are a factor. But then there's also that language change for younger people. More actually, like I think the stat is around 64%, 63%, something like that, of people under 25 identify as something other than straight, so somewhere within a queer space, or don't identify as heterosexual or cisgender. So, you know, there's a huge amount of words to describe people's identity now. And if that means, you know, when you're looking at younger generations and when they're coming into jobs and coming into job roles, like they're thinking, most of them are looking at people's websites and jobs that they're looking at. They're looking for places where they're going to feel comfortable and where they're going to feel accepted. So I think one of the things that I always tell corporates when I'm working with them is like, people are going to be looking for that because those identities exist, and they do exist in older generations too. But there is a lot more kind of awareness, I think, and words that younger generations describe themselves as or have experience of. So when you're thinking about how you're bringing people into the industry and what jobs they're going to be doing and who they're going to be working with and in what contexts and what spaces, like you have to think about that. You have to think about how people are going to feel using different, you know, using different language and that kind of thing. And you have to progress with that progression that's happening, because otherwise you just get stuck in that kind of not being accepting for people, and it not feeling good for people that are coming into different sectors, and particularly with music. It's a hard sector to get into. It's a hard sector for anyone generally. So if you're a more marginalized person, you know, if you're non-binary, if you're trans, if you're a person of color, like all these different things, like working class background, like there's lots of different barriers for people. So yeah, I think that's probably long-winded, yes.
Right, I think we're probably out of time now, unless anyone has any more questions. But you've got Antonia's email in the chat, so feel free to reach out. You can reach out to me via live. This session is going to be posted on the live website, so you can watch back. Please share it with colleagues, friends, anyone, to help, you know, spread the message and educate our industry further. But yes, thank you to everyone for joining today, and thank you, Tony, and everyone at Come Play With Me, for all your time and efforts in putting today's amazing session together. And I hope to see you at a future Live Talks event.
Thanks, everybody.